In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 4 different stocks that have IPO'd very recently. They're DoorDash, Airbnb, Snowflake, and Palantir. I'm going to use multiple different tools and techniques to tell you which of them I think is actually a buy soon and which of them might be a sell soon. And if you're long any of these right now, I'll give you an idea of how much longer I think you should hold them and where my price targets are actually going to be, whether that's to the upside or to the downside. So if you feel like you missed out on the IPO craze that just happened, maybe this video will help you get over the FOMO or fear of missing out and help you find the next best entry into each of these stocks. To start off, let's start with one of the more recent ones, and that's DoorDash, and the ticker is Dash on the stock exchange. Now I have DoorDash open with just daily candles right here, and it's only been about a month since this IPO'd, so there's really not too much data on the daily chart here. Just to kind of zoom into this a little bit, I've switched this over to a 2-hour chart, and let's go ahead and start by looking at that. Without doing too much on this chart, you can see that DoorDash is definitely trending downwards. Now a downtrend is signified by lower highs and lower lows. So you can see that if we look at the highs and lows of this chart, which start up here of course, down to this push or even this push, and then the next high after that is all the way up here, this high is lower than this high, and then the next low relative to this high right here is somewhere down here. Maybe we've put it in already, maybe we haven't, but either way, it's lower than this low and this low into here. So I think there's no questioning that we're in a downtrend. So step number 1 of to feeling bullish on DoorDash and wanting to actually take a long position in this would to be having that downtrend actually stop and instead switch to an uptrend where we're getting higher lows and higher highs. Just to start off super simple on this chart, I'm going to put in some support and resistance lines that we've clearly established on DoorDash so far. Now to find these on the chart, all I'm really going to do is look at those highs and lows and maybe some of the ones in between and see if some of these price levels have been tested multiple times, whether that's attempt to break through them and then finally we did break through them, or even on the reverse side, if we broke through a certain spot and then we came back and when we tried to go upwards, this was the spot that rejected. The very first line I'm going to go ahead and draw on this chart that I can see just by hovering my mouse right here is the low of the first day that we IPO'd, which is around $163.70. If I just put a horizontal ray right there, you can see of course that we have the support from the first day, as when we IPO'd around $182 it hit the market and immediately dropped down to about $163 on that first day. This supported the price. When we came down to this spot a little bit later, we actually broke through it, but then the next daily candle went up and tried to break that exact same spot. You can see this wick right inside of here came to that exact same level before it rejected back down another $10. And then a few more times throughout here in the middle of December, and even through here it acted as support and resistance pretty strong. So I feel pretty good about this line. Let's go ahead and draw some of the other ones on the chart. I see one in here as well, as it supported all through this area, resisted through this area, and supported many times through here. And finally, I see one all the way down here around $147, where we used it as support in here, and of course resistance a couple times now. And actually one last line is the one we're kind of hovering around right now. It's right around $140, and we've used it as support for quite a few days in here. All of these 2-hour candles are supporting it all the way through here. Even with just a couple wicks below, we've never closed below that $140 line on the 2-hour chart here. So even if we just look at the rightmost part of the chart here, you can see we're kind of range bound since December 29th here for the couple days that we had between $140 and $147. If you're thinking about going long in DoorDash, you'll want to see a break of 147, which could signal a run up to 153. And if you're looking for a short position, you'll want to look for that break of 140, and who knows how far down it could go from here. As I see it for now, as long as we stay in this range of 140 to 147, it's incredibly difficult to take a trade and know which way we're going to go. Now, just to add a little bit more to this chart, I'm going to try and throw on some trend lines and see if we can find any significance with them. So I'll just try and draw a trend line from the very start up here and kind of play around with it and see how many of these candles I can connect, what trend line actually fits best in this other chart right now. And I like the look of something like that. It catches all of the bodies up here, even though we get a bunch of wicks up, catches the wick of this perfectly. This wick kind of rejects this line, even though we do go above it by a couple of dollars, and then we reject it through here as well. And we'll try and do the same thing on the bottom side here. I can tell that if I start all the way at the leftmost part of the chart here, just by eyeing it, that anything I draw to is just going to be too steep, where the price would need to drop another $30, $40, $50 even to come to this trend line, as you can see. So I'm going to try and start it from somewhere else, and just by eyeing it, like I said, somewhere in here looks good to me as this wick down here, and I'm going to see if this connects along pretty well. And I really do like the look of this trend line right here, where we catch the bottom of this and this low inside of here, and we pulled it sideways to catch the lows into here and all through here as well. So these true trend lines are actually converging towards each other, and at some point in the middle of January, they'll actually apex and we'll have to break out of this triangle one way or the other. So adding on to looking for the break of either 147 or 140, a breakout of this triangle could be another signal for taking a really good trade. For example, if the price starts to head back up and we break out of the blue triangle and above this 147 line, maybe this would be a really good signal to enter a long position, with a first target up at that next resistance around 153, 154, but potentially even targeting back to the highs, as a break of a triangle like this is a pretty bullish signal. The very last thing I'll do on this chart is just use a little bit of Fibonacci retracement, one of my favorite tools, and we'll try to use one of the price targets on it. For this, I actually use the negative values of the Fibonacci retracement. So I like to buy or enter a trade at the 50 or 618 of a Fibonacci retracement and target the negative 23.6. I'll show you what this looks like. I'm going to pull from the all-time highs of DoorDash up here down to this low into here and pull sideways. So I clicked up here and down here, and now, like I said, I'd be looking to buy or enter a position. In this case, it would be sell, since we're looking for a short off of this pull, at this red line or this golden line. And when I enter at either of these two spots, I'm looking for this green negative 236. So you can see we had this fib pull on this chart, and we entered a short at this red 50 and targeted this green line right here. We actually got this trade perfectly to our success spot right in there. If I just go ahead and zoom in, you can see that this wicks that green line almost perfectly within about a dime. And this could actually be a really good signal that maybe the bottom of DoorDash actually is in. So just to summarize real quick, I'm not taking a trade on DoorDash currently, but if we start to break out of this blue triangle and above this 147 resistance, I think a long entry in DoorDash could be excellent, and we could start heading back up toward those $195, $200 highs that we had on the very first day. So let's go ahead and move on to Airbnb, ticker ABNB. Airbnb IPO'd at almost the exact same time, but the daily chart looks pretty significantly different. We opened around $145, and the same day we saw all the way up to about $165 before falling back down and closing around right near where we opened. Downtrend for the next few days, and we ended up seeing prices as low as $120 before Airbnb ran really hard and got back up and put in new all-time highs at 175. So again, let's just zoom out so we have a little bit more candlesticks and a little bit more price data visible to us. You can see that ever since we were at those $175 highs on Airbnb, it's been a pretty strong downtrend, and I'll try and draw in some trend lines just like I did on the previous chart here to see what I can kind of connect. And you can see that we actually have a pretty strong trend, and we're following these parallel lines to each other. So if you wanted to keep it simple on here on Airbnb, you could go ahead and try and buy at the bottom of this trend line. For example, if we were to come down to here, like this, something like that, then you could go ahead and enter a long trade targeting back at the top of the trend line. Or even if you wanted a short entry right now, you could take a short targeting the bottom of that trend line once again, and just stop out if we break above this trend line right here. So it might look something like this, where you're entering right now, you have a stop loss just above this trend line right here, so maybe about a 2% loss on the stock itself, and then targeting the bottom of the trend line, maybe about an 11% target. This is keeping it pretty simple. You're just using these parallel channel right here, and you get about a 4.6 to 1 risk to reward ratio. So if you're right, you're going to make a lot more than if you're wrong on this trade. And so far, we've bounced up and down between this trend line multiple different times. So why not believe the past and think that this is actually a really good trade opportunity, as long as you're open to shorting the stock. But let's not just leave it at that. Let's actually use my favorite tool once again, the Fibonacci retracement pull. Now for this one, I'm going to pull from the very bottom down here up to the very top and just pull sideways. Now, just like before, I told you that we want to buy at the 50 or the 618. When I have a pull where I can see that the price is already in between those two levels, the very first thing I'm going to do is actually validate that the other levels of this Fibonacci retracement have been valid so far, that they've been respected and actually significant. So I'm going to just hide the trend line for just a second here, just so we can take a better look at that. Let's look at each of the levels of this fib retracement. Coming down right away, we have this 236, and the very first time we pushed down strongly, about a $5 to $10 push downwards right here, we rejected the 236, and then we rejected it once again, hovered around it before our next push downwards, almost perfectly to the 382 on this large red candle here, where we rejected it again in here, and in here, and in here. Again, a nice breakdown through, right to the 50, where we rejected multiple times, and we've hovered around this 50 quite a bit, and in between this 50 and the 618. So with all that said, by looking at these levels, it's pretty clear how significant this fib retracement has been, and so if we were to come to this 618, we can have pretty high confidence that we're going to reject it just like we did the rest of the levels. Now, are we going to end up breaking through it and going down to the next level after we do have some strong resistance at it? Well, that's definitely possible, but it's definitely a trade we can take as well. If you wanted to be patient with this stock, you could wait for that bounce right off the 618 and then target that 236 just like this. And now let's go ahead and put those parallel channels back on here, those blue trend lines that we drew. And I'll leave the chart just like this for the most part. If we can come down and reject this 618, I think it would be a really good long entry, and you could put your stop just on the other side of this yellow 65 and target all the way back up all-time highs at around $188 here. And believe it or not, if you wanted to be a little bit less patient, you could probably actually enter a trade on this right now long, same exact stop loss below that yellow 65, and target all the way up at that green line. You're still getting a more than 5-to-1 risk to reward ratio, so this is not a bad entry at all. However, with this downtrend in these parallel channel that we've drawn, it might be a little bit better to wait for some sort of confidence, whether that's a breakout of this parallel channel or a bounce off this 618. So let's move on to our third stock, and that's Snowflake, or ticker of snow. Now, if you trade stocks or you're in any sort of Discord group that trades stock, I'm sure you've heard a lot about snow over the past couple of months. And by the way, if you want to be in a Discord group that trades stocks, options, etc., I do have one myself, and I'll put a link to it in the description below. You should come by, check it out, and come talk stocks and trade with us every single day. We give out a lot of live trade alerts, and we have multiple sessions every single week teaching our members how to trade and be profitable trading. Okay, so Snowflake IPO'd around $244, and in the same day we saw the price break up above $315 to about $318 in here, and it pulled all the way back almost right where it IPO'd. After that, we saw a couple days of a downtrend, touching about $208 on the lows, and then we saw all-time highs in snow above $420 through the beginning of December, and ever since that, it's been a pretty strong downtrend for snow. Now, of course, I'm looking at this in hindsight, but if you just take a look at that daily candle here on December 8th, this is an extremely bearish candle. It's known as a gravestone doji, and it would have been a really, really good signal to take a short on Snowflake. Or if you were already long, to at least close your position and start taking some profits. But I know talking about hindsight doesn't really help here. Let's talk about what we think is going to actually happen next on snow. Just like with DoorDash, I'm going to draw some key support and resistances on this chart very quickly. The very first one I see is right in here about around $275, which rejected through here, and finally it was part of our breakout that pushed a move that was about $50 to $75 higher than that level. And I see another strong one in about here around $252, and we've got another one right in here around $339. And finally, the last one that I see on snow is somewhere down here around $231. These are kind of the four levels I see, and we're actually coming close to that $275 level right now. So we could do the same thing on this and draw some trend lines. However, there's not a ton of significance because we've really had just a pretty straight move on the daily chart here. We went straight down here, put in one point there, another one up here, and now we haven't really even found a bottom, and it doesn't look like this will be a bottom just quite yet. But let's draw these in anyways for now, and I'll keep just this top line in here. Until we can break through this top trend line that's used our two highs so far at about $428 and then right after it at $361, snow is probably going to keep downtrending. So if we were to come up and test this channel again, if you wanted to take a long entry on snow at that point, you would want to wait for a breakthrough of this line to think about entering. So once again, let's go back to our trusty Fibonacci retracement tool. For this one, I'm going to look at the bearish Fibonacci retracement pull again from our high to the low right after it and pull sideways. And if we just expand that a bit, you can see that we actually didn't quite make it to the red 50 this time, and instead we pretty much rejected right at that blue 382. So while it's not my favorite spot to take a short entry on a trade, it does show some significance in this pull, and it still is targeting that green line down here, which lines up almost perfectly with our pink $275 line that we drew. So this $273 to $275 range is definitely going to be some support and might end up being a bounce zone for Snow in here. For now, I'm going to draw a small box inside of there to cover that zone, and then I'll delete this off my chart just to keep it a little bit cleaner. The last thing I'll do is try and draw a bullish Fibonacci retracement on this. So I'm going to pull from our lows all the way down here to our high all the way up here and pull sideways. And I actually don't like the look of this Fib retracement pull at all. As price was coming downwards, we didn't really reject at the 38, we blew right through the 50, kind of fell into no man's land inside of here. On the way back up, same exact thing, we went quite a bit past 38 and just wicked up into no man's land here, and on the way down we had no rejection at this golden zone. It's important to keep in mind with technical analysis that we're trying to solve a puzzle and it's not really a science to it. We need to understand what fits the market and use that to our advantage and expect it to fit the market again. So clearly this Fibonacci retracement pull has not been significant yet. There's no reason to believe that any of the other levels on this pull will be significant. So let's try and find a better one. I'm going to mess around with this pivot here and just move it up to this next one in here. And now using this low here actually looks a lot better. When we first started coming down, we had this red candle here that rejected the 38 before we broke through it, and that red candle covered the exact distance from our 38 to 50, where we closed right at the 50. The next candle wicked down right into our golden zone, which in hindsight, this would have been a really good place to buy, around $303 to $305 in here. And if you caught a long entry into there, that would have been awesome for you because it ran up about 55 points after that. And of course we rejected on the way back up at this 50 in here for the first time, then rejected the 38 before we started falling back down, and now we've actually fallen through the golden zone of this. But you can see that the next level of this Fibonacci retracement, that 786, lines up almost perfectly with that box we've already drawn. So let's just expand the box a little bit, and now we have 3 points of confluence that fall in between $276 and $272, signaling that maybe a bottom for Snow is actually pretty close. So if you're short Snow right now, it might be a good time to start looking for an exit out of it. Now of course this last daily candle here looks pretty bearish as it fell about 20 points in one day. So it's not an immediate action that I would take to get out of a short position if you're in one. However, I'd start watching the 2-hour candles, 4-hour candles, and maybe the 1-day candle, and if we do start to wick and bounce off of this zone right here, then maybe you could start to take profit on your short. And if we were to come into this box and then start to reject and break through that blue line, this might be a really good signal that Snow is going to start heading back upwards again. And finally, last up, we have Palantir. Now Palantir also IPO'd at the end of September, early October, and it actually hasn't seen prices as low as when it opened on the market ever since that very first day or within the first few days after it, around $9 here. Palantir has been running super strong ever since that $9 range and actually saw prices upwards of $33 and almost 50 cents on it. Now, once we hit that $33 peak, we did have a significant pullback all the way down to $21 on Palantir, and once again, just looking at the candlestick pattern of it, this was a really good sign that we were going to have a reversal from the downtrend that we were seeing. This candle right here is known as a bullish abandoned baby, where we have a strong red candle, we gap downwards as a doji candle, and then we gap back upwards as another green candle. It's a very bullish pattern, and it would have been a very good signal to try and enter back into the trade, and it would have ran you up another 10 points, which was about 50% on the stock. But now let's look back into real time with Palantir, where we headed next. Now, this one's a bit tricky because we didn't really put any sort of support or resistance lines in on Palantir here, as it was pretty much just exponential upwards with no pullback all the way until this spot right here at 33.50, the all-time highs. And furthermore, since those highs, we've been kind of trending sideways, so any sort of trend line isn't really going to help us gauge where the price is headed next. So let's go back to our Fibonacci retracement and try to play around with a pull that might help on this. I'm going to pull from the very bottom down there to the top once again. And it should be extremely clear how significant this Fibonacci retracement pull was. The daily candle right after our all-time highs here rejected to the tick, that 38.2, before it headed back upwards. And just 2 days later, when we found the low of that pullback, it was right to the penny, right at that 50, at this red line right here. And we've used the other two levels, the 236 and 382, as strong support and resistance all throughout this move as well. So personally, I think the price of Palantir is actually going to keep heading downwards. I think we're going to break those lows that we put in before at about $21.10 in here. And I think we're going to head down to that golden Fibonacci retracement, which is around $18 on Palantir. The good news is that when we do come down to this zone, and you can actually see that we have quite a few candles that fell into this zone as support and resistance through here before we really had a strong breakout in Palantir. So this doubles our confidence of this zone. But I do think that once we come into this zone, that this is going to be one of the best long entries that you can find on Palantir for a very long time. If you can load up on Palantir in the $17.50 to $18 range, you'd have a first target all the way up at that green line around $39. And I would not be surprised if we end up pushing towards my second target, which is the -618, or this blue line, up at about $48 on Palantir, or even up to the third line, this -1 at about $58 on Palantir. So for now, I don't think there's much to do with this stock. It's kind of trading sideways and looks a bit bearish. If you're in a short position, you could definitely ride it down to that red line as a first profit target and maybe into that golden zone as a second profit target. And if you're looking for a long on Palantir to buy more or buy in general, that $18 range is perfect and might be one of the best trades you could take all year. So that's pretty much it, and that's my analysis on these 4 IPOs. All of these are setting up for potentially great trades in the coming days, weeks, or months, depending on how long it takes to get to our price targets. But you should definitely keep an eye on all of them, and if you have TradingView, make sure you get those alerts set. If you made it this far in the video, it means you enjoy this content, and you'd probably enjoy seeing more of it. So why don't you do me a favor, do yourself a huge favor, click that like button below, and hit subscribe for more similar future content. Everything you see on this channel is going to be very similar to this, and it'll help you trading any sort of asset that you might want. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a happy new year, and as always, good luck trading.